I'm sharing with you some insights on my PhD project. And I want to caution you a little bit because I'm at the very beginning of my research, so this is an ongoing kind of project. I'm basically just throwing some ideas around and to see what happens. And I might also make a few sweeping statements, and I beg your pardon for them. I'll try and clarify later if need be. So my research in general is concerned with the body, which is, of course, nothing new in literary studies, sociology, or philosophy, really. However, I do think that literary studies appear preoccupied with the body and performance, and the vast majority of the criticism is gendered on the gendered body. And key words such as masculinity, femininity, or the queer body, and key works such as bodies that matter, or the body that matters, and so forth come to mind, although the latter is, strictly speaking, not literary criticism. In sociology, there are several approaches at work at the moment. One of them, for example, the theory on the transhuman, developed, I believe, out of cyborg theory and preoccupied with the technological body and body enhancement. To summarize very briefly and very sweepingly, if you want to know more, speak to Dan or Luke, they know these things. There's also, however, body studies, which is spearheaded by Brian Turner, who himself has been a major influence on my work and my research. And in philosophy, of course, the body, or the discourse on the body, is manifold, varies, and centuries old. And much of the philosophy I've worked with before is concerned with a specific way of liberating the body, both of its own boundaries, as well as from societal and imposed restrictions. Deleuze and Guattari is something that I've worked with. Zizek also sometimes poses interesting and related what-if questions. And of course, Baudrillard's outrageous views are sometimes something someone can work with every now and then, or work against, as it were. And this is working really well with authors such as Chuck Palahniuk and Don DeLillo and J.G. Ballard. These theories seem to apply, they work. I can use them. With McCarthy, I find that none of these really apply enough to make an approach feasible on McCarthy and the body. So to excuse what's coming next, I am still searching for the theory to really back up what I want to say about the work, which also means I'm not torturing you with any philosophy at the moment because I don't have it. So my stuff will be text-based. So in all of his novels, and Blood Meridian is certainly no exception, McCarthy's characters are rather flat. They lack psychological depth, and their motivation and thought processes remain unknowable, if not incomprehensible. What we do learn about the characters is what they look like, specifically the ways in which their bodies are marked, scarred, wounded, and mutilated, or, in fact, dead. It appears to me that the more information we receive on the body, or about a body of a character, the more important the character becomes in some way to the narrative. I will come back to that later. It seems to me also that McCarthy is using bodily markers to suggest affiliation, especially in Blood Meridian. One of the prominent markers is ethnicity. The novel is littered with ethnic identifiers such as Mexican, American, Indian, or indeed niggers, although the latter is often blurred, and Glanton's gang appears to kind of apply the term to all non-white people. McCarthy is very specific as well when it comes to Native American affiliations. He specifies tribes such as Apaches, Comanches, Tiwas, Yumas, and so forth. One group of the Native Americans that he does not identify, according to their tribal affiliation, is the following. And I'm sorry that I can't read it with the same rhythm that Dave has before. This seems to be a very important part of the novel. A legion of horribles, hundreds in number, half naked or clad in costumes, Attic or biblical, or wardrobed out of a fevered dream with skins of animals and silk finery, and pieces of uniform still tracked with the blood of prior owners. Coats of slain dragoons, frogged and braided cavalry jackets, one in a stovepipe hat, and one with an umbrella, and one in white stockings and a blood-stained wedding veil. And all the horsemen's faces gaudy and grotesque, with daubings like a company of mounted clowns, death hilarious, like a horde from hell, more horrible yet. In the aftermath of this apocalyptic appearance, Sproul asks the emblematic question, what kind of engines was them? But we never find out. Their affiliation somehow appears irrelevant. And there is another group wandering through the novel that is uniform and unified in their bodily markings. Each more pale than the one before, and all tattooed, branded, sutured, the great puckered scars inaugurated God knows where by what barbarous surgeon. Some deformed, fingers missing eyes, their foreheads and arms stamped with letters and numbers as if they were articles requiring inventory. When looking at the Glanton gang from within, McCarthy does identify ethnicity markers, the black and white Johnson, for example, the one Mexican in the group, the Delawares. As soon, however, as we are looking at the gang as spectators rather than witnesses, they seem to merge into a mass of scars, wounds, and mutilations, justifying their very existence individually and within the Glanton gang through these markings, until they become spectre horsemen, pale with dust, anonymous in the crenellated heat, like beings provoked out of the absolute rock. Daniel Weiss has suggested, albeit for No Country for Old Men, this equally applies to Blood Meridian, I think, that violence is effacing all boundaries. I want to suggest that this is also true for Blood Meridian, and find the right paper, and that those boundaries are not just spatial, but violence is also effacing all ethnical and physical boundaries, and renders obsolete traditional markers of affiliation. The Glanton gang has come together because they recognize each other through the traces of violence upon their bodies. After all, and I quote, "The desire to be recognized by others is inseparable from being human," as Giorgio Agamben posits in Nudities. This also suggests, in a way, that the spectre horsemen mark their victims as one of their own, because they are marking those bodies with violence. But to evade this kind of criticism to what I've just said, I want to argue that all affiliation terminates in death, both direct and indirect. The gang does not only leave their dead behind, they also leave associates behind that are severely wounded, especially in the desert non-spaces, where healing them is less of a benefit than leaving them or actually killing them. Rather than buying into the idea that scars are a mark of a life well lived, the text appears to suggest that scars mark affiliation, make recognizable associates of violence, and trace an effacing of all boundaries, all traditional boundaries. Scars evidence survival skills that in turn mark their bearer as a competent warrior, and after all, your performance in war is all that counts, because if war is not holy, man is nothing but antic clay. So far, so good. And this all makes sense to me, and I hope to you as well. But we are now faced with another problem. Quite significant a problem as well. If the members of the Glanton gang identify each other through their marked bodies, what then do we do with the judge, who is bald as stone, and he has no trace of beard, no brows to his eyes, nor lashes to them, immense and pale? This vast abhorrence that is continuously described as pale and unmarked by scar, wound, or hair, and is therefore not even marked by human nature. The judge is the only character in the book that enters and exits the narration without even so much as a scratch. It is at this point, for now at least, in my own research, that I kind of have to resort to an argument that I have made before and that Joel and Dave might actually be aware of, and I hope Nick too. But I still stand by that argument. McCarthy frequently employs his characters as allegories, and I want to suggest that, and this might actually be one of the very few suggestions in McCarthy's studies that remain uncontested, Judge Holden is an allegory. He's an allegorical figure. In fact, I want to argue that Holden is an avatar fashioned out of the land and socio-historical context, an avatar of space and time. Rereading the book this week, I was again struck by the similarities between descriptions of the judge and of the land, both vast and vicious and unforgiving, no redeeming feature about them. The judge also embodies the socio-historical context, as Verlaine and Bell has suggested in the first ever published monograph on McCarthy, and Nick Monk has recently summarized in a conversation. The judge is the Enlightenment logic pushed to its very limit, to its very extreme. And that logic, of course, was rife in the mid-19th century. So the judge is outlandish, or maybe rather inlandish, as an avatar of space. Not entirely human, and so he should not be recognizable, theoretically. And he really isn't. Except for Glanton, all members of the gang appear suspicious of the judge, avoiding his proximity, listening to his sermons and yet lacking the capacity to understand what is being said, except for maybe the ex-priest, but I will unfortunately not have time to examine Tobin further here. The gang's implied rejection of the judge also shows in their reaction when Holden kills the young boy after playing with him for a while. Perhaps also in an almost casual manner in which the narrator mentions children dying and Holden appearing shortly afterwards, usually naked, as I've mentioned before. The judge is somehow always set aside from the other members of the gang. By far the most suspicious of the judge is the kid. See the child, the book opens, and evokes an echo from another novel, a child of God, much like yourself, perhaps. What follows is a fairly detailed description of the kid, on whom we can never quite agree if he is really the novel's protagonist or not. Uncontested is that the kid certainly plays an important, if also allegorical, role to the narration. He's pale and thin. He wears a thin, ragged linen shirt. He watches, pale and unwashed, and in him broods already a taste for mindless violence. On the first page, we learn what the child looks like, what his disposition is, his education. He can neither read nor write, despite his father, the schoolmaster. The kid's mother did incubate in her own bosom the creature that would carry her off, the implication being that the kid has killed for the first time before he even properly arrived in this world. The physical description of the kid continues. He's not big, but he has big wrists, big hands. His shoulders are set close. The child's face is curiously untouched behind the scars, the eyes oddly innocent. McCarthy describes the kid with a curious amount of detail, and here I want to come back to what I said initially. The amount of physical detail we receive about a character is directly related to their importance to the narration. This might also be why we cannot really agree whether the judge or the kid is the real protagonist. The level of detail is about equal. The level of description of both bodies is about equal. The detail does prove, however, that the two characters are antagonists proper. The judge is broad, tall, vast, and completely unmarked. His hands strangely childlike. The eyes in his naked face appear all-seeing and all-knowing. The kid is not big. He has big hands, And while his face is marked by scars, the eyes remain oddly innocent, curiously untouched. There is a lot more to the body in McCarthy's work, parts of which I cannot discuss here because there is no time, and parts of which I cannot discuss here because I haven't gone there in my research yet. I want to add that it's not only scars, wounds, and mutilations that I'm looking at for my own work, although everywhere the dying groaned and gibbered, indeed, in McCarthy's work. But I will also be looking at illness and alcoholism, for example, anthropophagy, as well as faces, expressions, and especially eyes. We have that in The Kid, for example. Very interesting also in Boyd Parham in the Border trilogy. All these areas are worthy of study, and I'll be working on it, and I'm sure there'll be another forum in which I can discuss in a little more detail. But this is my part for today, and I'm going to give over to Ronan. Thank you.